This is Marshall Lee of DonkeyJawProjects.com, and this is the Early Bird Artcast. We're doing something a little bit different today. This is actually happening on Sunday morning before we do the video with Peter Smetti. And so it's being done privately, and then we're going to release it publicly during the week. Giving it a shot. I had a hard time with last week having a lot of overtime and stuff and having a hard time to get videos out and all that. So I figured, let me jump on this early. And so I'll have some videos to post for you guys during the week. So anyways, today, once again, for the Early Bird Artcast, we have Mr. Russ, my wonderful co-host here. How you doing, man?
Hi there.
And where, of course, can people find you, Mr. Russ?
Yeah, russleach.com, comicbookblackbelt.com. Or on YouTube as Comic Book Black Belt. You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter, Facebook, the usual places, and sign up for my email list. That's you can get that at onlydeathcansavus.com or just go via my website.
Awesome. And I would definitely recommend that. I can't wait to see what this book is going to look like. Just by the one image that you've put there, I'm just like, this is going to be cool. So I can't wait. Of course, you guys know where you can find me. DonkeyJawProjects.com, Marshall Lee _DJP on Instagram and Twitter. And you can sign up for my newsletter too and go read some cool free comics. And also, don't forget to go over to the Discord and hang out with us there, because Russ is in there, I'm in there, a lot of people are in there, and actually this topic that we're going to talk about today partially comes from a question that I think it was Mitchell. I forget. I think it was Mitchell who asked this in the Discord. He was wondering about physicality and body language in comics. And so we're going to definitely get into that, and also a little bit of a twist too. I recently was watching some interviews on John Buscema. And apparently he was trained as a fighter. I don't know much more than that, but he was trained as a boxer, I think. And this was before I think he got into art and comics and stuff. But that was, people said at the time, that was something that helped him, because it helped him to bring a physicality into the comic page, which I think is really interesting. And I wanted to bring that up because Mr. Russ Leach, we have not talked about this yet too much, which is surprising. But Mr. Russ Leach is the comic book black belt on YouTube. And it's not just because he likes, karate and stuff. He actually is involved in that kind of thing. Is that not true, Mr. Russ?
Yeah, that's right. I've been in and out of dojos since I was a kid. I've done some different martial arts, bit of taekwondo, Shotokan karate, and other bits and bobs. But most recently, my longest span has been with Wadaru karate. I'm now third dan black belt. Have been for 4 years now, and I'm currently studying in Korean karate. So it definitely does make a difference when you're considering how someone might move in a fight, because you're obviously aware of techniques that you wouldn't necessarily be aware of if you didn't study a martial art. As I understand it, John Buscema was boxing, and he started drawing other boxers' portraits. So that was something I learned only recently from Marshall, actually. And it does make a difference if you know how to move, if you know how to fight. It can help you. I mean, you can also do it by studying or going and researching films, good martial arts films, and or even the bad ones, to be honest. Just as long as it's all action and martial arts. I mean, Bruce Lee is obviously fantastic, but going and seeing all kinds of different types, and looking at the way people move, the way they drop their weight before a strike, that kind of thing, very helpful. I know that John Buscema, for instance, did some quite wacky things as well. So, for instance, when he was looking to do, when he was looking to over exaggerate the form, he would look at different ways of doing things. So I think one of the good examples was using a speed skater as a punch. So I don't know how many pictures you've seen of speed skaters, but they lean quite far over and their arms fling up behind them as they're going. And so in this one particular pose, you can see a speed skater and the arm right the way down. And I think he may have used that for a punch as a reference. I don't know if that's true or not, but I've seen it in several places. And it makes sense, because if you look at a lot of the expression and movement that he has in his work, in fact, all the great comic artists have in their work, it is an exaggeration in order for it to jump off the page. So if you can find a reference of a human body that's not necessarily doing the same thing as you're drawing, but in a similar movement, and for instance, the speed skater overextended, it can be quite powerful as a visual tool.
Interesting. Before I forget, actually, I want to go into a little bit more stuff with the karate and stuff. But before I forget, do you? A lot of artists talk about doing this, and I've done it, but not as much as I would think I would do it, because it makes too much sense to do. But do you like take pictures of yourself like posing and stuff and use that for reference ever?
Yeah, but we don't talk about that.
Well, I want to see all these pictures now. No?
I actually have a library of hands, some of my own hands and other hands, some hands that I've drawn myself, and I just have a library of those as quick references. And the ones that I've drawn myself, sometimes I even pop into a sketch. So if I'm doing a sketch and I have a hand position that I know works well and I've got it on file, I'll pop it in, and then I'll amend it and draw over it at a later date. And that speeds up the process. Occasionally, I mean, in Draw the Marvel Way, I also wrote some of the editorial tips. And something that came up quite often was the concept that as a comic strip artist, you're also an actor. So you're the art director and the director of photography. So you the look and feel and the angle, which you've already spoken to the executive producer, who is the writer and all those other things that the writer is. And then you create the angle, you create the look, but then you also are the actor as well. So get your face into the position you'd want if you're going to do a facial expression, or if you're going to be running or jumping or doing some kind of position. It is worth kind of standing up and thinking, well, how does the body work in that position? How does that happen? What's the energy involved in the movement? So whether it's taking pictures of yourself, whether it's pictures of other people, or just getting up and feeling a movement, it's definitely worth that kind of reference material and throwing yourself into the positions that you're drawing your characters in.
Interesting. Cool. So yeah, wow. You said a lot there that I think was really interesting. I think one thing that is interesting too, that's similar but not exactly the same, is when you're writing and you're coming up with dialogue and stuff like that, out and try to almost be the actor or whatever. And I think some physicality even comes into that, because when you're acting, when we say physicality, it doesn't mean you have to be like an athletic person necessarily.
No.
I think that might help, especially when you're doing action stuff, that could help, but you don't have to. I know for myself, I'm not, I've always enjoyed sports like a lot. I love playing sports. I did actually do some jujitsu when I was a young kid. Not very much, but I liked it. Just we ran out of money, I guess. I don't know, my parents, but but I've always loved sports. Like I still love it. I just don't have time to do it. I would love to do more sports, but I do feel like that does help a little bit, kind of knowing how the body moves and stuff to to be able to kind of translate that into a drawing, you know.
Definitely, yeah. And speaking, like you're saying, talking your script out loud is important. You must act it, because it's so often you see a stilted script, and people also the way people talk as well. Try and listen to different accents and different geographic differences between people. It's not always about it, and not specifically even foreign accents. So understanding how people speak the English word slightly differently, which you can see in things like, for instance, the way Gambit talks in the X-Men. He's got that slow. He's got that sort of French slur to the voice and the way that it works. But not even just that. Just the way maybe a New Yorker would talk compared to someone from the Midwest. And those are things that you can go to films and books and radio and listen to, and just take it in. So it's as we've spoken about so often about comics being for everyone by everyone. You really got to open your mind, open your eyes, and open your ears, and take everything in as much as you possibly can. And then from a people perspective, to watch from an anatomical perspective and a gesture perspective. Just watch everybody all the time. I find myself sitting on the sofa next to my wife, just looking at the way her mouth moves while she's talking, or what her nose looks like, or I look at my kids and think, how does the head shape work? And they look back at me and go, "What are you doing?"
Stop looking at me.
I'm just lost in observing.
Mom, Dad's looking at me again.
Yeah, don't go there. but yeah, just getting yourself lost in observing the way people move and the way that they act, and listening to the way that they talk, and the punctuation that comes with it.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I mean, people watching, I think, is really important. And, don't be a creep, obviously. I mean, I don't think we're saying that in any way, shape, or form. But, it's true, though. Like, I mean, I've always, I think if I wasn't an artist, that's why people like stories about people, and they don't want to, watch a story about a potato rolling down the stairs or something, like we are attracted to our own selves as far as like when it comes to story. And, I think even if I wasn't an artist, I enjoy, just seeing how things work and stuff, and seeing how different people react to different things, whether it's physically or emotionally, however it is, and I don't know, I just have always found that interesting. So be an observer of people, not in a creepy way, but in, just a normal way. So the other thing that I did want to dig into, though, was what about, I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into your experience with martial arts, and, kind of what got you into it originally, and is there anything that you take away from what you learn, even if it's philosophically? It doesn't have to be physically, but I'm curious, is there anything within the philosophy of the martial arts that you've studied that you've been able to kind of adhere also to comics?
From a purely business perspective, discipline. You don't right. So, for instance, as someone who's taught karate, I've often been in a situation, and I know people who teach karate who talk about a similar situation, where parents turn up and say, "My kid needs to learn discipline." It's like your child needs to learn discipline at home, not in a dojo. That's where the discipline needs to be taught, and respect. But it's self-discipline in a dojo. So you force yourself to make as correct a form as possible in your karate or your martial art. You drive yourself to to practice again and again and again. You do the basics, as in we have something called line work a lot of the time in karate, where you are asked to do the most basic moves. So punching, blocking, simple blocks. And you go up and down the dojo, called from your sensei, and you repeat, rinse and repeat. And you do that a lot. And certainly where I am at the moment, we start every lesson with basics. And that's something that kids can sometimes find a little dull. So you have to work it for the younger students.
Mm-hmm.
But that idea that you're repeating the basic things again and again and again to get them right, your 10,000 hour principle, is the same in art, I believe. I keep repeating the same things, and you get better by repeating it because you become more confident at it and you become more observant of what you're doing. And then the discipline from a business perspective, as I started off, of just sitting down every day and having self-discipline to get on and do a job. We all know as artists that there are days when you're just not inspired, or you're thinking, I can't do this. But if it's your job, you don't have that luxury. So in some ways, get that expression selling out. It's not selling out. In some ways, it doesn't become as joyous as doing it just for yourself in your own time. However, there is the extreme satisfaction of knowing that there are companies, businesses, customers, consumers of your work that will pay you with their time, with their life. Effectively, money is time, and they're giving themselves in order to have something that you've produced. And there's a lot to take from that. But either way, having the discipline to sit down and get on is a self-discipline thing, and I think that's a good thing for your whole life. It's something that, when I go back to the martial arts, it's martial arts is a way of life. I mean, I'm not a warrior. I don't do it 5 days or 7 days a week. I stretch as often as I can, and I do occasionally do some practice at home. But my 2 training sessions of a couple of hours each, they're where I do most of my training. So it's restricted because obviously life gets in the way. You can't train every day the way that you'd want to, because you've got to keep paying the mortgage and feeding the kids. But it's there for you, and it's that self-discipline that really I think is a way of life. It's the way you approach karate or the way you approach a martial art, and it bleeds out into the way that you generally approach your life. And that's also generally the way I approach my art as well. Hopefully, I can muster up that self-discipline to sit down and get on with the job, even if I'm not feeling inspired. So.
Absolutely. That's really cool. I think it's interesting because a couple things that you said there. First of all, you were talking about kind of more on the physicality side. I feel like you were talking about like repeating and doing things over and over again, and I feel like that that has to do with like muscle memory, and a lot of us don't really realize how big of a thing that is. Once you get to the point where you've done something enough, you can finally start to do it without thinking about it. And I always think about that when I learned how to drive a car. When I first learned how to drive a car, I was aware of every little thing. It was overwhelming. Okay, look at your mirrors, and you got to look, turn around. You got to remember where the gas pedal is, where the brake pedal is, how to shift the car, how make sure you turn the lights on. Like there's a million and one things to think about really when you first learn how to drive a car. But now I drive all day for work. I get into a car and go somewhere and forget that I even drove there. Like I don't even remember that. Like, I just did that. Like,
road coma. Yeah. when you can't actually remember what you've been doing for the last 5 minutes because you've been thinking about whatever's going on in your life, or the next comic that you're doing, and you've driven 5 minutes and you think, I don't remember checking any mirrors. I don't even remember being on the road. It's because you're automatically doing it. You're right. You have that muscle memory, and not just muscle memory, brain. It's like repetition of behavior. I don't know the exact time. Something stupid like 3 or 4 weeks or something. If you don't do something for a period of time, you forget how to do it. And that's like, seriously, you forget how to do things. So it just goes to show you how many things you repeat every day, physically and via behavior. One of the things that gets leveled at karate quite often, especially on YouTube where I see it, one of the criticisms is that, oh, well, that wouldn't work in a fight. And often it wouldn't work in a fight. But what you do is, because of the muscle memory, because you drill yourself again and again and again, you find that you would do things in a situation that someone who didn't train again and again and again wouldn't necessarily do. And you also find yourself probably being a little calmer as well, because you're more confident with your body and what you can do with it. So it's not always about exactly what you see when you see an example of a martial art. That, oh, well, you know, that's obviously a fight stopper. It doesn't always work like that. There's adrenaline involved. There's real life involved, and also the way that you train as well. But it is all about muscle memory. And as we were talking about it being a way of life, I listened to a guy on YouTube recently, one of the masters, and he was saying he was teaching his students not to fight. So effectively what he wanted was them to be so confident within themselves and their ability that actually they exude a confidence that people wouldn't necessarily want to take on. And there's something to that in martial arts, and there's something to that in a lot of what you see. If you see people being assailed or attacked or whatever, it often seems to be people that not that they're victims, but that they're not necessarily have the tool set in order to protect themselves. I mean, it's rare you see a story or a YouTube video where somebody jumps someone who is a black belt in whatever they might be, and that ends badly. I mean, you know, normally it's people who aren't exuding that kind of confidence who get jumped. But that's going off into self-defense, and that's a whole different subject, really, from martial arts. But the whole point being is that you repeat the same things again and again and again. It becomes muscle memory, and it just makes you more prepared should something happen. But that's not why I train in karate. I train because it's part of what I love doing. It's a whole thing.
Absolutely. Awesome. So I was thinking, when you said that, it's funny, like a lot of us in my audience, not everybody, but a lot of us are familiar with this thing called 100 Days of Making Comics. And, you know, that was started by Kevin Cross. And now I've been a fan and somewhat of a friend as well of Kevin Cross for many years, even before he did 100 Days of Making Comics. And most of that is from knowing him through, he had other podcasts. He had Illustration Party Time, which he did with Joshua Kimball. And he also worked with Mark Rudolph and Jersey Droz in the Art and Story podcast. And so I kind of known him through that. And I do remember an old Art and Story podcast where him and Mark were talking about some things. And they mentioned, it was kind of funny because they were like, you know, they're like, go out and do stuff, you know, you don't just like, you know, in order to tell stories, you kind of have to experience life as well. Yeah. So they were kind of saying, go out and do stuff. And somehow they got onto the topic of like being in like a bar fight. And I thought that was hilarious. And they would be like, and at the end, like before they were closing out, they're like, yes, go out and get into a bar fight. And then you'll be able to tell a good story or whatever, which I thought was awesome. Obviously,
Yeah.
we're not saying go out and get into a bar fight, but of course, experience life. But there is something to that, though. I like this idea of like, you know, they talk about the, you know, some the criticisms of karate is, you know, or other, you know, martial arts is that, well, that wouldn't work in a real fight and stuff. And you brought up the idea of adrenaline and stuff. And you know, I think there is something to that. I don't think it's, you know, totally true or anything. I think, you know, I'm sure somebody who knew martial arts would be much more equipped to take on somebody than I would. But at the same time, it's like getting yourself, you know, a lot of times when we make comics, we think about, we're like, okay, I have to do this, this, and this, and I want to prepare, and I want to do, you know, world building or whatever it is. You know, I got to get things ready, and, you know, I'm not good enough an artist yet. I got to practice till I'm good enough to make a comic, and this and that, which I think, you know, I'm not putting that down. That I have those same impulses, but there's also something to, you know what? Let me just make a comic. And that's how I went at it with my first mini comic and mini comics following that, is, you know, get into the mess and then fight your way out of it, you know, kind of thing. And if now I have never been actually in a fight. Like I said, I have taken some karate. There was like the tiniest little scuffles here and there, but really not even anything you would call a fight. Personally, I just have not. But I do know what it's like to get into a messy situation and kind of fight your way out metaphorically, in a lot of different scenarios in life. And I think that is actually a very valuable thing as well, you know, when you're thinking about making comics.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, from the fight perspective, it's you just got to get your way out no matter what. It's just what tools you have at your disposal to make it easier to get to the end goal. From a comic book perspective, you can only finish the journey if you start. Every journey begins with the first step. I mean, that's platitudes, but it's true. If you don't get on with it, if you don't dive in, then you're never going to get anywhere. You have to take a chance at some point, whether it's an artistic, emotional chance where you're concerned that you're not good enough and that people will criticize you, or whether it's just the chance of, I'm going to give this a go, and you know, I'll maybe invest a little bit of money as far as I'm going to go get it printed up, or, you know, or I'll build a website or get someone to build it for me. All these things, they're all part of it, and you've got to get on and do it. Otherwise, if you don't, you won't get anywhere. So somebody asked me, I think might have been Noel Scala, who put out a question. Any of you guys in this group, I can't remember which group we're in, are actually full-time? And I wrote back and said, well, I'm not full-time comics at the moment. I have been full-time comics. I'm doing storyboarding and other bits and pieces, but I'm a full-time illustrator. And another guy piped in and said to me, you know, how did that work out with you getting gigs? You know, how does that work? And I said, you know, I had to be realistic and say, well, first off, you've got to be polite, approachable, and hit deadlines. Outside of that, you've just got to go and work to get work. You've got to, I think we spoke about this, you've got to be on a project in order to get another project. And I know that sounds kind of obvious. It's like, well, where does the first project come? And the point being, you've got to go out there and find it. You've got to go out there and get it. And if you can't, then make your own. And just, that's the only way of getting noticed, is to, you know, and at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, is not so much getting noticed for the sake of getting noticed, but every one of us that are drawing comics or writing comics have stories in us. We're the storytellers, with the cave painters. Okay, we've gone out, we've hunted the meat, and now we're going to tell everybody how brilliant it was when we did it. And we want other people to see those stories and engage in those stories. And that's why we need to be noticed, because if you're not, then you're just telling your story to a wall. Nobody gets to see it, do they? Nobody gets to engage with it and maybe understand your viewpoint on the world, which is what you were talking about earlier on. The reason we enjoy stories is because they're so personable, to whether it's to us or whether it's to somebody else's experiences. That's what interests the human mind. We want to find out about what other people feel inside and how we feel about, the stories that we make. So yeah, just do it. Just do it. Got to get there and do it. Like I say, you can't finish the journey unless you start it.
And similarly to that, you were talking about the discipline of it, and I think that's interesting too, because when you're doing, martial arts, the way they typically train, from my understanding, is, you're pushing through to get to a different belt color or whatever, a different level. You're leveling up each time, and you go through a succession of trying to get to new, heights and stuff with that. And, there's something to this when you come to the discipline of finishing something, instead of, you could start something and that's a challenge within itself, but it's also a challenge to finish things. A lot of people start a lot of things. This was my problem. I don't have a problem with starting. I have a problem with finishing. And that's why I'm so focused on, finished, not perfect. To me, that's a big deal, because I've been in that loop of not finishing things. And I think, a physical discipline, even sports, but also, karate teaches you things like that,
If I could strike an analogy, I would say each of your belts is a comic book. And eventually there is no end. There are goals along the way. So as you go up your grades, you learn more techniques, and you become fitter and stronger, better with balance, more able to understand the results of your techniques. Kata, you learn long form kata and what have you. And it's much like that with drawing. I would say, if I expand on it, what I mentioned on my channel, and I reiterate every now and then, is I don't call myself the comic book black belt because I'm the finished thing and I'm brilliant and I'm the expert. I call myself a comic book black belt because the first black belt I got was a confirmation of understanding the basics in karate. I understood basic techniques. I understood basic form. I could do certain katas out of memory, and I was proficient. But I wasn't the finished article. And as you move up your downgrades, so for instance, up until your first downgrade, the way I saw it was that karate controlled you. Effectively, you did what Sensei said. You did exactly the move to as close a possible repetition of what they had shown you, the technique. And then once you move past your black belt, you start understanding that everybody's body is different, that you all have different approaches, and that you can bring your own personal abilities, your own personal strengths to the art. Some people can turn up at a dojo and they can kick over your head before even learning a technique, and some people can't. But there's no point in kicking that high unless you have technique, because it will be a useless kick. So you learn the basics, and then you move on into your downgrades, and you start really appreciating how much more there is to learn. And you're always learning more from the people around you, whether they be a higher grade or a lower grade. You're always learning from each other. And that's what it's like. I felt it was like for comics. I'd started, I've been drawing since I was a kid. I got picked up by Marvel in '95 from the New Talent Scout, but that went nowhere. And as it happens, and I'm on record as saying this, I think it's right that it didn't, because I wasn't mature enough at the time. I came back to it after a career in production in 2010, sold up my house and got a smaller one so that I could do what I wanted to do. And I thought, yeah, I'm really good at this. I can do this. And I realized that I wasn't very good at it at all. And I had to work really hard at it. And then 2015, I got my professional gig with Doctor Who, and it went from there. But the whole point being is that I had to work on the basics. I had to work my way through the basics, get to a point where I started to think, right, I've got the basics down pat. I understand at least how the basics work, and now it's for me to move on and not only use those basics but expand upon them and have my own style. And that's the similarity at the far end, where martial arts is a never-ending series of learning and self-analysis and self-learning until you die, basically. So is my art as well, because I'm moving forward and constantly. I'm never the finished article. I'm always adding to it and trying to do things better and working on it, and that comes out as your own unique look, your own unique style. So you have your own unique style in a martial art, and you have your own unique style in art as well. So that's where I kind of came from to call myself the comic book black belt. It's not out of an arrogant sort of, I'm an expert. It's not that at all. The idea is that we're always learning from each other and we're always improving.
So when you get your black belt, you're not automatically Bruce Lee then?
Oh no, it's not the way it works at all.
All right. Good to know.
I'm third dan, and it still doesn't work like that. Although I must say I'm getting on a bit now, so my hips aren't really as loose as they should be.
Gotcha. So now you said you've, and I want to get into body language and stuff as well in comics, but I'm kind of stuck on this a little bit. You said that you've studied a few different disciplines, I guess. I'm not sure what you would call them. Not just straight up karate. I know for me, it was jujitsu. It was a different form, I guess, of jujitsu. I don't really know like much about it, but they called it Iru Jujitsu. But I thought it was really interesting because jujitsu isn't really an offensive martial art as much as some of the other ones. It's more of a reactive martial art, and so it was just, I always thought it was interesting because it was not about, trying to punch and kick and fight as much as it was to, like, when somebody would throw a punch to you, now you know how to take their movement and use it against them and throw them down on the ground. And same thing with a kick or whatever. It was more of like reacting to what they were doing. And I always thought that was interesting. I've taken that and it made me think of a lot of things with careers and stuff as well. And, just realizing that you don't have to, you don't have to be on the offensive. You don't always have to be the one instigating things. You can react to things, and then kind of even with my comic book storytelling and coming up with ideas, a lot of times I think about like, well, the world is doing this with comics. What if I did that, but kind of in my own way? Or what if I used that momentum and kind of found my own way to do it? Or what if I did something totally different, but still within, enough within that realm where it catches those people's eyes or whatever, even just with story, all kinds of different things. Have you found any things within specific different studies that kind of have helped you out or you've thought of?
Yeah, I suppose similar to yourself, being reactionary when it's appropriate. The thing about the different martial arts is you can have soft styles and hard styles, and karate is traditionally thought of as a hard style. Mm-hmm. But I would have to say, as I've gone further up the downgrades and listened and spoken to more and more people who really know what they're talking about, for me, it's become a far softer style. There's far more movement. We do throws, locks, finishing moves, sweeps, all kinds of stuff. So my karate has expanded greatly simply by learning from other people and looking around. And so I think the core of it being is that there's only so many ways that the human body can move, because you have joints that are, physically only move in certain ways. And so it comes to a point where lots of martial arts end up blurring at the top end.
Mm.
This is my opinion. Obviously, I'm sure there'll be people who disagree with me, but that's the way I see it. And which is why you can have people who, masters of arts that are very different, being able to train together or being able to train each other's students in different varieties of technique, because the basics have been mastered. They've moved forward. They've understood that, that you can mold an art or a technique or whatever into the way that you want it to work. And as long as it's effective, it doesn't matter.
Mm.
And I think that's the same. Again, go back to the comics and with artwork. You're always looking around for the technique that somebody else does that might just work in your style. Copying other people's styles doesn't work. I've tried and it doesn't work. I tried it as a young man. I was obsessed with Jim Lee for a while, and I did some work. Actually, some of the work that got accepted by Marvel was probably because it looked a bit Jim Lee-ish. Not that I'm suggesting I'm anywhere near the standard of the great Jim Lee, but it had that kind of look and feel, and it was very popular at the time. And I was taken in by it as well. I wanted to look like that. I wanted my work to look like that. And it's only in the last, since I started again from 2010, where I really thought, right, I'm gonna do this, that I realised that I had to be confident and I had to be focused on what I wanted my own artwork to look like. I had to be honest with myself as to what the things that really inspired me were, and I went back to the Bronze Age because it was all the comics as a kid that really, really, truly inspired me. Even though there was some great stuff in the 90s. And actually, there's been some great stuff since the 90s. Well, there's some fantastic artists out there working still. And being able to look around and see inspiration in other artists as well as in the real world, and then being confident enough to say, right, I'm going my own way. And that's pretty much the same thing. It's like you're learning from others, you're inspired by others, but you take your own path, and it works for you.
Interesting. That's good stuff, man. All right. What's that?
Getting a bit deep. Going all Zed.
That's what we do here, man. We got to go deep a little bit. We don't want to just be just another show talking about the same old things. So
yeah, cool.
So yeah, and now I wanted to kind of make the transition over to body language a little bit. And I mean, we kind of did talk a little bit about this and stuff too, but the thing with body language, and it's a little bit almost like a different topic, but I did want to still address it because I think it's related enough. But the thing with body language is it's interesting because, with comics, we're talking about, the art side of it is there's storytelling. Obviously, all sides of it, there's storytelling. But one thing that we tell story through is dialogue. And even in life, they talk about, well, a person's body language, it really it can tell you even more than what they're actually saying. They could be lying to your face, but their body language will show you, can maybe reveal that, especially people who study that kind of thing. I haven't so far, but I think it would be helpful, if I did. And, so there's a lot that can be shown through posture and through just subtle gestures and looks and facial expressions and things like that. Have you done much into kind of studying body language, and do you think about that when you're working on your comics and storytelling?
I certainly think about it while I'm drawing. Yes, in order to portray, you've got to read the script. You've got to get inside the idea, the persona, where the character's coming from in that portion of the script when you're drawing the panel that refers to it. And you can't just have a flat person screaming, like somebody standing there with their arms down screaming. Obviously, they'd have their arms out. They'd be animated. So that is important, and it's important to get it right along with the story that you're telling. It's, you know, you see this sometimes where people will, and this happens unfortunately a lot, where people trace. I don't. We'll go on to a completely different subject about tracing. I don't have an issue with tracing. Neil Adams said any artist that said they don't trace is a liar. I think I'm paraphrasing, but that's the case. If it's good enough for Neil Adams, it's good enough for me. And I have traced in different forms for different projects at one point or another. There's no shame in it. If you've got to get a job out, you've got to get a job out. But if you rely on it, you will miss the core of comics, of telling stories. You'll miss the body language and the subtlety that comes from understanding the way people move and the way that they balance themselves and the way that they emote, not just from their mouths but from their faces and their bodies. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with it. It's okay to do it, but if you rely on it, it will hurt your storytelling ability.
Right.
Also, it tends to stilt the way that a page works. So because you can't always get exactly the right angle, whereas if you're drawing it out of your imagination, you can create whatever angle you want. So yes, I am aware of that kind of thing. I wouldn't say I'd studied it no more than what we were saying earlier, where I, you know, occasionally watch what my kids or my wife are doing. I watch the cat as well. It's like, it's just studying people, and I think that's the best way to do it. It's just be aware of how people communicate with you and try and fit that into when you're telling a story and how your characters emote from it.
Yeah, I definitely think it's something that maybe we don't think about a lot. We probably think about it in kind of a kind of subconscious way. I think we all probably do as artists. But we might not. Maybe it would do us some good to kind of analyze it a little bit. I know, like I said, I haven't really yet, but I'm thankful that Mitchell brought it up in the Discord, because I do want to now look into it. There's different things I haven't looked into that I do want to look into, that being one of them, and also acting, like the art of being an actor. Like, I don't know much about it, but when I hear people talk about it, I think it's interesting, and I feel like it would help me with my comics and stuff. But like we were saying, like, there's a lot that can be said through body language, and I think one thing that we can see is I think now people do much better with this in general. But I've seen in the past a lot of comic artists actually have very bad body language and acting as well. I've seen. I mean, I hate to do it, but everybody knows Rob Liefeld. He's kind of notorious for this kind of thing. But a lot of artists, him included, have had same face syndrome. He has a particularly bad case of it, where even his women and men kind of all look like the same person. But and it's always screaming faces. Like, that's the only emotion almost, or just standing there with no emotion at all. That's about the range you get, from, and again, he's learning from what he, got stuff from too, because there's a lot of artists from the past and now and in the future who've had this issue. It's an easy issue to get to, and that's actually where muscle memory can actually do you wrong, because you can get to this muscle memory where you draw the same pose over and over, you draw the same face over and over. You know what I mean?
No, you absolutely nailed it. We've all suffered from it. I've suffered from it.
Absolutely.
And you once you're that, and which is why criticism is so important, because you get a good critique and you will change your artwork. The two best critiques I got were from Charlie Adlard and Jimmy Pamiotti, and just they made a difference to my artwork. And there were only small things. I mean, both of the guys said to me, "Oh, your artwork looks great, but this thing here is just not quite right. And it made a massive difference to the way that I drew, and it made a massive difference to the way I approached my drawings. And yeah, it's really important to get that emotive aspect in. I think any life classes you can do ever, and drawing from photography, but more better than that is life classes. That helps, because then you get a real sensation of weight and gravity in a figure. And once you understand the weight and gravity in a figure and the way that people can truly sit or stand or run or whatever, then it's easier to then put the emotive aspects on top of that. So it's like building up your understanding of how people work. And in Rob Liefeld's defense, his work was full of energy. And that's what it was really all about, the energy. And often what you do with even subtle emotions, because it's in a comic strip, you, just like your fighting and physical aspects, you have to exaggerate it a little bit. And dare I say, John Buscema and his ilk were experts at this. They managed to do the things that, for instance, Rob Liefeld did with the energy, and they had simplicity in their work. If you look at the economy of line in something like the Fantastic Four, and the emotions that are exuded from very simple faces, they are very simple faces, and yet you get all kinds of emotion and all kinds of expression, and it's just a masterclass. It really is. I mean, I just where are we? I've got something here. I'm trying to get a decent sized picture so that you can. Yeah, look, this panel. This panel is just. I mean, Sue Storm's eyes are a little bit goofy, but other than that, here we go. That panel where Franklin is tweaking Reed Richards' nose. That's just look at the expression in those three faces, and look how simple the economy of line that goes into that, and that is masterclass. That's how you do it. Yeah. Because if you put too much, we all know if you put too many lines on a face, it adds years to the face. But just outside of that, being able to, when we were talking about earlier about confidence, about having a confident line and knowing that it works, that's when you're really, really doing it, really working well. And so that kind of work, that's what I would suggest is awesome. It's the target. That's your benchmark. That's where you're going for. Simplicity and economy of line, but at the same time, expression, real expression, without going over the top. And you're right, not everybody grits their teeth. I don't think I've ever gritted my teeth like that. I can do that.
That's funny. Yeah, no, it's so true. And I think, again, in Rob Liefeld's defense, I will say, Jack Kirby. I mean, everybody loves him. Well, not everybody, but you should love him. No, but he's amazing. He's very highly regarded. He's the king of comics. He had same face syndrome like crazy. Like every character looked like him, actually, to be honest. No, I mean, he had like a few different faces at least, but yeah, he definitely had some of those things going too. But again, that energy. I mean, if I could have the energy that Jim, that Kirby or Rob Liefeld have in their work, and still have safe and sacrifice it for same face syndrome, I'd take it any day.
In defense of that, obviously he was an artist that hadn't had a lot of training. He was coming from a raw talent perspective, although he could draw. If you look at some of his earlier, not the very early strips, but sort of before he got involved with Timely, there's some lovely art in there, and he was producing some quite fine features. But
Yeah.
by the time he got to the 60s and 70s, his art, much like Jim Lee, Jim Lee has become almost a parody of Jim Lee, in the most respectful way. His art is just, you can see who it is immediately, and the later stuff that Kirby did was just so Kirby. And this was something I've actually got a documentary on one of my watch lists that I've got on the YouTube channel, and I put it on there the other day, and I think it was Neil Adams that was talking about Jack Kirby, and he said as a young man he would look at the work, and other artists would look at the work, and they'd put down some of the aspects of the way that it was rendered and what have you. And he'd say to the others, he'd say, well, can you get, you say that this is wrong in some way. Can you get that energy out of your work? And they'd shut them all up because, you can't. He had become an abstract artist to a degree. He created a style and he created modern comics. And so for that, I think I can afford him some room on the occasional same face. Because, like you're saying, because it's just so amazing. But then I would move on, further up to people like Neil Adams and John Buscema and the more realism that they brought. But at the same time, not so much with Neil Adams because he not the realism aspect. Depending on who the inkers were, Neil Adams' work was a bit more detailed. But then if you see, for instance, if you go and look at the Conan work from John Buscema, the inker over the top of that, most of the time, I can't remember the guy's name, but there was just so much detail and it was so worked. And I love that as well. And that's not an economy of line at all. There's just so much of it, but it's still gorgeous stuff. But I think probably where there was an economy of line is just in the simple aspect of a feature, of a turned up corner of a mouth or a stare from the eye, and it's those subtleties that come through an exaggerated expression. That's the skill. It's genius, to be honest.
Yeah. And I think one thing that can help too that I just stumbled across recently was Making Comics by Scott McCloud. He's got this whole see if I happen to have it near me. No, I don't. But he has this whole section where he goes through faces and how to get different expressions and stuff. And I was amazed when I saw this because he had a formula. He would say take anger and take sadness, add them together, and then make another emotion that is a little more complex, but it's still you can kind of look at the shapes of that the face makes and stuff when it emotes those emotions, and you can actually kind of formalize what a more complex emotion might look like. And if you can get those subtle emotions into a character in your comic, I mean, to me that's amazing because like I said, I've grown up on a lot of comics where a lot of the faces look the same and a lot of the expressions. I mean, I've seen even in movies, you can tell bad acting sometimes or even bad directing or bad writing, when every character is angry at each other. It's everything pisses everybody off. And it's that's not interesting. You need to have a lot of range,
We have a lot of television like that.
Yeah,
I think this is something I did. I don't claim that this is a perfect example, but it is something I did a while ago. Share that. Can you see that?
No, hold on. I gotta go back to it. Let's see. I just see you sitting there.
You see me sitting here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can share that. I have to share it. All right, here we go.
All right, so it's like expressions, different kinds of expressions.
Yeah.
And it's good practice to try and make the same face do different things. And you've got to act those things out yourself. Like I was saying, look in a mirror or just try and contort your face and feel the muscles and what they're doing. I'll stop that now. I'm back in a room.
In the dojo, back in the dojo now.
And it's important to do those exercises for yourself. But it's not just expression. It's like you were saying, the same face syndrome. It's also difference. There are racial differences, physical differences,
Mhm.
and just making sure that you're picking those out in as simple a way as you possibly can.
Mm. Yeah, that's something that Scott McCloud went into as well, because you could be angry, but you could also be very tired or something.
Mm.
So what's the difference between an angry, energized face and an angry, tired face? You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, exactly. And
so there's
you
all
want to be
kinds.
able to pick that out.
Yeah, cool, cool. Yeah, and I'm just trying to think too, like with body language and poses and stuff. It comes through observation. Um, and I'm sure there's a lot more to be said about it, to be honest. But again, I haven't really studied it, and maybe I should have Mitchell on sometime. I don't know if he'd be interested in coming on, but
Sure, you would.
he said he had studied that. He actually was recommending a certain book that I guess Will Eisner recommended in the comic book Great series with Stan Lee, and I don't know. So if you want to go watch that series, you can hear him recommend it. But I looked up the book, and honestly, I just couldn't afford it at the moment. I don't think it was super expensive, but I just couldn't really afford it. But I am curious to kind of look into that body language and what I can bring into my comic storytelling with it.
There's another master, Will Eisner.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
just if you don't have this book, buy it.
yeah.
Because
Which one is it? His
it's
book on
life
making
a life
comics.
force.
Yeah.
It's just
Oh, I haven't
looking
heard of that
through.
one.
Oh, it's fantastic, and it's slightly more liney than the stuff I was showing you, but
Mhm.
it's still simple. There you go. Just the faces. The expression, what's going on
Mhm.
with the hands. It's it's a masterclass. It really is.
Yeah, I mean that, and
Get it.
that's I think that's the bread and butter of comic creators who don't necessarily do like action stories or superhero stories. If you do a story like we're doing a romance story together, me and Russ, there it is going to be important to get that body language right and the expressions right, which I'm sure Russ is going to knock out of the park. And that's it's going to be really cool to see, because when I was writing that, I was thinking a lot about physicality. And you know I think this is something that I actually get from manga a lot, because when I first wrote it, I was thinking about I was going to be the one drawing it, and then Russ came along and said, "Well, that's a cool story. I'd like to try, draw it." So, it ended up working out in that way, which was really cool. But when I was thinking of it, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna, try to bring out a little bit of manga in me, and I don't want to, I'm not trying to draw like a manga comic, but I want to get some of that energy that I see in manga comics. Some of it's a little exaggerated too much, but I was actually pushing that a little bit in this. And so I have the girl like being very expressive and doing things, just that really not even express the emotion, but the energy. Like she just comes in with a lot of energy and a lot of spunk, for lack of a better word. And I just wanted to kind of emulate that. And then the boy or man, I don't even know their ages, to be honest. I wrote the thing, but I didn't necessarily put an age on them. He's kind of depressed and he's sad, and he's in a place where he's kind of just dejected and stuff. And so there's going to be a lot of body language there, and there's just so many things to the characters that you can do. And I don't know, it's just fun to think about that. Like I said, manga is a great example. One of our friends, I mean, a lot of my friends I see doing this really well. I think of like Teresa Del Pilar. She's been on the show a lot.
Yeah,
She's great
yeah,
with her expression and body language. Actually, I said this to her before, and I thought it was funny her reaction. But I was like, I kind of, when I look at your art, it reminds me a little bit of Norman Rockwell. And she's like, Norman Rockwell, I'm not that good. I'm not whatever, like the typical, humble thing that artists would say. I was like, well, the thing is the expression that you put into in the body language and stuff is just, it's fun and funny, And also my buddy Gaz Gretzky, he's really good. The horror A4, he's really good with it. And also Mike Emmerich, who's been on the show too, he's really great with body language and expression, and a lot of other people who I've seen too. So yeah, I don't know, just observe people who have that kind of expression in comic books, because
yeah,
some people are good at it. And like Russ said, Will Eisner is, I mean, he's the master. I mean, he's great at it.
yeah. Just look around, and inspire yourself with other artists. As I said, keep reiterating. Just don't copy them. It's okay to copy when you're getting starting out and learning. Um, just try and be yourself, because that's where a successful, I think personally, that's where a successful style comes from, because
Hmm.
it's you, and it's your personal, it's your uniqueness down on the page, and that's what's important. So,
Absolutely.
and those three artists you spoke about, I've gone to their channels and subscribed some time ago, a couple of them, and they're fabulous. It's so great to watch. And so, we all have such different styles, but you can learn from other people's work without a doubt. Use them as inspiration.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and as an artist, you love it if somebody says you inspired me to do something.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the feedback I've been getting with the YouTube stuff that's been going on is it's always nice to hear good feedback about that stuff, and for sure. Yeah, I don't know. There's one other thing I was thinking of. The guy who did Seven Samurai. This is one other little aspect of body language that I can bring. I don't have a lot I can bring to the table on this, but this is one thing that I did notice. The guy who made Seven Samurai, and a lot of other movies, but very, very influential in the film industry, and also even in comics and other industries as well. One thing he said while he was making a lot of these movies is he would tell the actors, he would say, pick a gesture, that kind of characterizes the character, that you're supposed to play. Pick a gesture and then repeat that throughout the whole filming, do in different subtle ways. And you could actually see that in the actors. And that's one thing that I thought was brilliant that he told his actors. So again, when you're thinking of different characters that you have in comics, the people have like a certain way they walk and stuff, and they have like a certain strut, or they have a certain, some characters are more confident, some characters are less. They all have a different thing within their personality. So you can kind of think of these things and pick a gesture, and try to repeat that through the comic. Don't be like crazy, like, this is literally how the character looks through every single panel. Of course, you don't want to do that, but you can find, even in one gesture, you can find, okay, say somebody's more of a depressed type of person. Well, maybe they start to gain a little confidence, so their shoulders are a little bit more back, but they're still in that basic pose. So it's like their version of confidence, might look different than, Mr. Superhero, who's confident all the time and never makes a mistake or something, So yeah, I don't know. That idea I think is really interesting, of picking
Yeah,
a gesture for each character,
yeah, good call. Yeah, I like that.
So yeah, I don't know. I think that's about all I have to say, and all maybe we have to say about this, and maybe we can revisit. One thing that's cool with these topics is, you know, sometimes it seems like we're treading on the same material, but there's, like, first of all, when you get one topic, there's a million different ways to put it, and I think we need those different ways in one way, it might not. So it's like you can have potatoes like a million different ways. You know, you can have potato chips, you can have fries, you can have a baked potato, you can have mashed potatoes. They're all really good in their own way, but they're still potatoes, you know? So, you know, I think we can always revisit this. Maybe we'll learn some new things and revisit this sometime. And all the other topics we talk about, I think we could do that as well. So it's never ending, I guess. But anyways, Russ, once again, where can people find you?
You can find me at russleach.com or at comicbookblackbelt.com. I'm Comic Book Black Belt on YouTube. You can pick me up on Instagram, over on Twitter and Facebook. Yeah, that's about it. I'll remember to sign up for the email subscription list so I can keep people informed about what's going on. I won't be filling up your inbox with rubbish. It'll just be once a month to let you know where things are.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the character Death has been part of the mythology of our world for a long time. And that's a potato that Russ is finding a new way to cook, you know, so definitely sign up to his email and find out how he bakes potatoes. Same thing with me. DonkeyJawProjects.com is where you can find me, and MarshallLee_DJP on Instagram and Twitter. And check out the Discord. We're having conversations like these every single day on Discord, and it's a great time. So other than that, thanks again, Russ, for coming on, and everybody for watching on the replay. Definitely leave your comments. Let us know what you think about body language and how it's helped you in your comics. And other than that, we'll talk to you next time.
Take care.
All right, later.